Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rick Smooth of the Pro Wrestling Archives, and this is a new series that we're going to bring to you called Title History. And I want to focus in on an ECW time period when it comes to the ECW heavyweight title. Now, this is a really fun thing for me because I have the facts right in front of me, or the title history right in front of me, I should say. And, Shane Douglas threw down the NWA World Heavyweight title, and so this happened on March 26, 1994. And it happened in Devon, Pennsylvania. And that was when, it became the ECW World Title. So, that happened in '94. The Sandman held the title in '95 for 6 months, and then he lost it to Mikey Whipwreck. Now, that was unheard of back then, to give that belt to Mikey Whipwreck. Now, the reason why I'm even talking about this stuff, because anybody can go look this information up, but I truly do believe in people getting a message through communication, verbal communication, opposed to reading things, because you don't really get all that unless you were there or you saw it when it was happening. And even some of the stuff when you watch back, you don't really get it the way that it really went down. So Mikey Whipwreck, to have won the ECW heavyweight title in October 28th, 1995 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That was one of the biggest underdog upsets in the history of pro wrestling. And it made Mikey Whipwreck. And Mikey Whipwreck had a pretty good run when he left ECW in WCW for a very short time period because the company got bought. But Mikey Whipwreck had a pretty impressive career coming out of ECW, just being up, coming up the way he did in ECW. Okay? And then, now check this out. The Sandman wins the belt December 9th, 1995. Who did he win it from? Steve Austin. All right? The Sandman, Steve Austin. If it's just a beer drinking thing, that would be one thing. But these guys have a certain kind of similarity about what they do. And it's really interesting that the Sandman and Steve Austin met paths the way they did, and Steve Austin ended up becoming one of the biggest stars in the history of professional wrestling, only not even 2 years after this, or about 2 years. So, it's funny how all this stuff works, and how all this stuff can be traced back. For people that weren't around back then, Steve Austin came up in he came up in WCW as Stunning Steve Austin, and he had what I would call, he had talent, but it was a mediocre run. And coming down to ECW was when he was doing stuff with Paul Heyman as far as the interviews, and Paul Heyman was telling him, look, man, just say whatever you want. Just vent, go crazy, whatever. Do whatever you do. And Austin, created, a certain character and a new lane for himself while in ECW, okay? Now, Raven won the belt in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, January 27th, 1996. All right. Now, if you know about that time period in society, or if you don't, in 1996 there was a lot going on. Tupac at this time period was on top of the world with hip hop. January 27, 96. Yes. And Dre had just left Death Row Records and shit like that, and there was still all kind of grunge music going on. I mean, when Kurt Cobain died, I believe that was like 94, 95-ish, MTV and all that shit was at its height. You know what I mean? And January of 96, Raven was the champion. Then the Sandman beats Raven for that belt. And then Raven wins the belt back in late 96. So going into 97, Raven is still the champion. And you know, Raven really had that. Yeah, I would say that Raven in that time period was a great example of a character from that time period. I mean, to really understand Raven, you really have to understand like 90s music stuff, you know what I mean? Because that was pretty much what he was doing, you know what I mean? You know, his look and what he was portraying, you know what I mean? So Raven is the champion leading into Barely Legal, and they have that three-way dance for the number one contender spot for the world title, which was between Stevie Richards, Terry Funk, and the Sandman. And that was a great match. Terry Funk somehow pulled it out, and then it was Terry Funk versus Raven, and it was just a bloodbath at the very first ECW pay-per-view called Barely Legal. I remember watching all the lead-up matches, or I'm sorry, the lead-up episodes of Hardcore TV on public access in Philadelphia. I was watching them with my friends Kenny Grady and Dahmer and I don't know, maybe Egan or some shit like that. I don't know. But so what I'm saying is the way that ECW caught fire around that time, and then Terry Funk to win that title in Philadelphia at the ECW Arena April 13th, 1997 on pay-per-view. I don't think anybody truly thought Terry Funk was going to be the one that came out on top. That was a real shocker. And, you know, to be honest, you know, in this time period, 97, you know, that was right after, you know, the Tupac stuff happened and the Biggie stuff happened. So, you know, at this time period, people were looking for something to come along and kind of really do something. And I would say pro wrestling did a pretty good job of actually delivering something that the people truly wanted after all that. I don't know if they get enough credit for that. You know, Paul Heyman, you know, but, you know, somebody like Terry Funk even, you know, I don't know what Terry Funk has to do with hip-hop or gangster rap, but I would say that, you know, society-wise, I think Terry Funk, you know, pretty much became the hardcore legend that night at Barely Legal. I mean, if he wasn't already at that moment, he took the crown. So, okay, after that, we got Sabu, August 9th, 1997. And, you know, Sabu's another one, man. Like, so I saw Sabu wrestle probably like 50 times or more at the ECW Arena because I was at every show after Hardcore Heaven 97. So Sabu, watching him perform and seeing the stuff he would do, that really was what made ECW in the sense of, like, you know, he was one of the first guys to really, you know, jump into the crowd and put people through tables with his body and, you know, do barbed wire matches and dive head first into the crowd and shit like that. I mean, you know, Van Dam was doing that shit too, and Van Dam was pushing that stuff to another level, but I don't think any of that would have happened without Sabu. Sabu was that guy. Sabu was ECW. And I hope he gets that kind of credit. You know, him and Terry Funk, man, those two guys in particular. I mean, there's other guys that were really good in ECW, like Bubba Ray Dudley and Taz and shit like that. Those guys were unbelievable to watch at the arena, and I'm so happy that I was able to go to them shows. You know, it's amazing that, you know, me and, you know, all my friends, my dad, all got to go to them ECW shows. Very special. Franchise Shane Douglas, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, August 17th, 97. Man. Shane Douglas, all right? So we used to see the Triple Threat come out, and, you know, I remember the Triple Threat as, you know, Franchise, Candido, and Bam Bam Bigelow. that's the triple threat to me, and that was one of the greatest tag team or greatest factions in the history of pro wrestling. Francine, one of the greatest woman managers I've ever seen, and especially being from Philadelphia and seeing how like it all kind of came together with her. I think that's really special stuff, man. So Shane Douglas, definitely another one. He is ECW, and when you got guys like Terry Funk, Sabu, and Shane Douglas all in the same conversation, you have some real serious, like that's a combination that you would never think to have. Like, okay, like Funk's from the old school, and then you got Sabu and Shane Douglas. These are different age. This is different age stuff, and seeing like the older generation and the younger generation, and then seeing somebody like Shane Douglas coming into his own, and then seeing like somebody like Sabu who was like really making a legacy. It's amazing. October 16th, 1997, Bam Bam Bigelow. Oh man, from Asbury Park, New Jersey. Bam Bam Bigelow. I remember seeing at Survivor Series 87. That was, I had it on videotape, and I remember seeing him, fly around and hit, hit the headbutt off the top rope, shit like that. And he was always just one of the best. One of the toughest guys that I saw when I used to go watch the ECW arena shows. Super tough. Hitting people with chairs as hard as he could, taking chair shots as hard as he could, and really just putting on a good show. I mean, I'm glad that he had his run the way that he did, because ECW kind of brought him back, and then WCW was able to utilize him and shit like that. So, I mean, Bam Bam, I think, has a spot in pro wrestling history. So then we got the Shane Douglas Bam Bam Bigelow match at November to Remember in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, November 30th, 1997. This was one of the greatest matches I've ever seen on pay-per-view. If any match stands out in ECW history to me, it's that one. And I'll never forget that, because the franchise was a heel everywhere else he went when it came to being a world champion, and when he was in Pittsburgh, he was a face. And seeing him change his style to really fucking win the fans over the way that it went down, and seeing how Bigelow just couldn't stop him. I mean, man, it was one of those matches too where it's like, franchise was like working on like Bigelow's like kidneys or some shit. So it was like Bigelow, he found Bigelow's weak spot and he just kept at it. And I'll never forget that pop of that crowd that night, watching that and being so proud of the franchise. Like that was the franchise's greatest match that I ever saw, you know what I mean? And I always was a big fan of the franchise, and I hope that he gets his credit in pro wrestling, because he deserves it. So that's the time period I wanted to zoom in on tonight on title history, because I think that was like a very interesting time point in society, and that I feel like wrestling really did fill that void of what was going on with hip-hop and shit like that, and it was taken to another level in pro wrestling. So I just wanted to tell the people out there, from where I saw it as, how old was I? 13-year-old kid, to how I see it now as a 35-year-old man. And hopefully 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, people are still talking about it. You know what I mean? Because pro wrestling in 1997 was definitely popping. All right? Peace.